north and northwest, or high teens. Some moderate to heavy showers crossing Scotland overnight, and then the main area of rain pushes into central and southern parts of the UK. Again, turning more showery, some heavy downpours by the morning, particularly towards East Anglia. 17 Celsius in the southeast, so reasonably warm, but clearer spells further northwest, and so a fresher night to come. And further showers arriving into central and western Scotland, Northern Ireland by dawn. Those showers also affecting northwest England by the end of the morning. Any early rain clears out of the way from East Anglia in the southeast, though, and so for the southern half of the UK, it's mostly dry by the afternoon with sunny spells, feeling warm in that sunshine, low to mid-20s, whilst 18 to 21 Celsius more likely for Scotland, Northern Ireland and Northern England, with a freshening breeze later on Friday and some strong winds in the west of Scotland overnight as we start the weekend. Further showers coming along as well, but mostly dry to the south, and actually it's mostly dry on Saturday in southern parts of the UK, with further showers and a blustery breeze further north. Sunday starts dry with rain later.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello and welcome to The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, this afternoon. We've got a fast-paced political bonanza for you today, covering all the stories that matter. Here's what's coming up this hour on The Briefing. It's a big day for many students across the country who are opening A-level, T-level and B-Tech results. It's the first time since 2019 that students have sat public exams after 2 years of cancellations due to COVID. And yet again, commuters across the country face a fresh wave of disruption as 45,000 rail workers go on strike. Should the government clamp down on the unions? I'll be speaking to the ex-editor of The Sun, Kelvin Mackenzie, about this. And I'll be speaking with GB News Home Affairs and Security editor Mark White on the very concerning developments in the English Channel as the migrant crisis intensifies. And of course, through it all, give me your political briefing. Send in your views and opinions by emailing gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet me @GBNews.
Good afternoon, it's 1 minute past 3. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB Newsroom. The number of top A-level grades awarded to students in England, Wales and Northern Ireland has fallen since last year. They do, however, remain higher than pre-pandemic levels. the last time students physically sat exams. Meanwhile, UCAS says the number of students accepted at universities and colleges has also dropped, but it's still the second highest rate on record. Education Secretary James Cleverly says there is support in place for students following the results.
We wanted to get the grades back towards the kind of levels that we saw pre-pandemic. We've taken a big step in that right direction. 2/3 of students getting their first or reserve place at university, and that is great. And for those students who haven't quite got the grades that they were hoping for, and that happens every year, there's a whole range of support both at school, university and at clearing to help them get onto a great course for them.
The executive head teacher at My Online Schooling, Rob Leach, told GB News one-off exams aren't the best way to test young people.
The current cohort of students have had a really tough time this year. And yet, as a system, we've gone back to the pre-pandemic status quo when it comes to these high-stake, cliff-edge, one-off set-piece examinations, which can give students grades that stay with them for life and perhaps are not the most accurate way of measuring how ready they are to embrace the opportunities.
Union bosses are warning that strike action will continue until a settlement is reached. More than 40,000 rail workers have walked out today and will again on Saturday in a long-running dispute over pay and conditions. Public transport in London will also be affected by industrial action tomorrow. RMT Secretary-General Mick Lynch says the situation is being made worse due to threats from the Department for Transport.
He's threatened at the weekend to make all our people redundant, issuing Section 188 forms, getting rid of all the guards on the trains. They want to close all the booking offices in the country so that people can't buy their tickets and get assistance. So there's all sorts of problems and the rhetoric is going up. What I think Grant Shapps needs to do is calm down and allow the railway executives, the managers of these companies, to reach a deal with us in collective negotiations, which I think we could do.
Well, in response, the Department for Transport says, "We urge union bosses to do the right thing by their members and let them have their say on Network Rail's very fair deal, which will deliver the reforms our rail system urgently needs." MP Margaret Ferrier has pleaded guilty to breaching COVID regulations in September 2020. Appearing at Glasgow Sheriff Court, she admitted travelling by train between Scotland and London, despite being told to self-isolate. She also admitted to willfully exposing people to the risk of infection, illness and death. Sentencing has been deferred until September. A 44-year-old man has been arrested in connection with the stabbing of Thomas O'Halloran in West London. The 87-year-old grandfather was attacked whilst riding his mobility scooter in Greenford on Tuesday. Former Labour MP Stephen Pound paid tribute to his former constituent, describing him as a huge character.
He'd sit there holding court in the cafe opposite Tesco's in Greenford, and it was like his mobility scooter was like a throne, because he'd be sitting there and people would be coming up and he'd give bits. When I was an MP, he used to give me lots of advice, and not always advice that I wanted, but he was always there. And such a high-profile, sweet, gentle man who the last thing he did on earth before he was killed was to raise money for Ukrainian refugees in Ealing. That was his last act.
3 people have been killed, including a teenager, in severe storms on the French island of Corsica. 45,000 homes have been left without electricity after hurricane-force winds struck land. A 13-year-old girl was killed when a tree fell at a campsite. A 72-year-old woman died when her car was struck by a roof. And the third victim was killed when a tree fell on their house. The mother of 12-year-old Archie Battersby is campaigning for a new law named after her son. Holly Dance is calling for a change to the system regarding end-of-life cases. Archie's family made multiple court appeals to continue his treatment, but he died on the 6th of August after being taken off life support. Speaking to GB News for the first time since her son's death, Holly said cases like Archie's are taking their toll on families.
There's been another baby, his life support was withdrawn 2 days after Archie. There's another case that was in court yesterday. It's the stress placed on us by the system. It's something's got to change. We've written to the Health Secretary, so moving forward to see what we can change. I think the whole thing that you're rushed into court, that's got to change.
Scientists have found evidence of an asteroid crater beneath the North Atlantic Ocean, believed to be 66 million years old. It's thought to have crashed down around the same time as the asteroid that wiped out dinosaurs. Researchers think the crater, found off the coast of Guinea in West Africa, was caused by a 400-metre wide asteroid. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now, though, it's back to the briefing with Tom.
Welcome to the programme. Now, today's top story. Rail passengers are facing more disruption, with only 20% of services set to run due to strike action. Half of Britain's lines have closed today and will again on Saturday, as more than 45,000 rail workers walk out in a dispute over pay and terms. Passengers are being told only to travel by train if absolutely necessary. It's the latest in a series of summer strikes that will alter the travel plans for workers, festival goers and those headed to the cricket test match at Lord's in London. Well, let's cross over to Euston Station in London and GB News correspondent Paul Hawkins. Paul, what's the mood on the ground?
The mood on the ground is, frankly, one from the union's point of view. Anyway, they've gone home for the day, but from the union's point of view, they'll be back. Certainly the RMT, when it comes to the national rail strikes, will be back on Saturday. They are staying resolute. They're not budging on this. You heard Mick Lynch, the General Secretary of the RMT, who we'll hear from in just a minute, saying that these strikes are going to carry on for the rest of the summer. They'll carry on for as long as necessary, and that he's not calling for a general strike when it comes to other sectors of the economy joining the industrial action, but he is saying that, look, there could be a coordinated series of strikes here, with nurses also potentially going on strike. We know that Royal Mail workers are going on strike as well. So from the union's point of view, the national rail strike will continue on Saturday. There will of course be a knock-on effect tomorrow, and then in London tomorrow you've got an overground strike. That's over pay. You've got an underground strike, that's over pensions, and a bus strike affecting some parts of London, and that's about pay as well. So London will be a big problem to get around from A to B tomorrow. But in terms of the dispute itself, in terms of the national rail strike, the two sides are still very firmly dug in. You've got the train operating companies who haven't met with the unions. You've got Network Rail, whose pay offer from July is still on the table. The RMT are saying we're not accepting that. We're not agreeing to the terms and conditions, such as permanent night working for some of our members. So this is what Mick Lynch, the General Secretary of the RMT, had to say earlier today.
We're making demands on our employers. What the employers have said to us is that we want to make thousands of your people redundant. They won't even give us a number, but we believe it to be in excess of 5,000 of our members to be put out of work. They want to create changes to our contracts of employment, which is a version of fire and rehire, because there'll be worse contracts than they've got now. We haven't had a pay rise for 2 or 3 years in many cases, and they want to attack our pension schemes. It's our job as a railway trade union to defend railway workers' rights. I think most people understand that. But we get many messages from the public, from the travelling public, fellow workers, people on our picket line here at Euston, who are saying we're really in tune with you because we're being treated the same way, or we've been robbed of all those conditions. The British working people are not getting a square deal off their employers. That's all we're asking for. And we'll support other workers. People say, oh, why don't the nurses get what you're getting? Why don't the teachers get what you're getting? They'll all be coming into this debate in the next few months. Many of those workers will be balloted by their trade unions because they're sick and tired of rich people, old Etonians, telling us that we've got to pull in our purse strings and just put up with a cost of living crisis and job insecurity, and we're not prepared to do that. We want dignity and a bit of respect off the employers and off this government. They've got to change their tune and get in tune with what working people need in this country.
So Mick Lynch there acknowledging that there could be sort of coordinated strike action, but he's stopped short of calling it a general strike. Just hearing from the Chief Executive of Network Rail, Andrew Haynes, who said that called the negotiations with the unions at the moment slow, painful, moving all over the place, a lack of clarity in how to resolve it, shifting goalposts. We are desperate to resolve the situation, and indeed that desperation is pretty much the only thing the unions, the government the train operating companies and Network Rail have in common at the moment. But the dispute is ongoing and there's more travel disruption, certainly in the capital tomorrow and then again around the country on Saturday.
You'd think that they might want to sort of unite it all, make it all happen on the same day, but no, it's going to stretch on for many people for many days. Well, Paul Hawkins, thank you so much for that update there, depressing as it might well be. Well, let's now bring in the former editor of The Sun, Kelvin Mackenzie, to explore what exactly could be the response to this. What should the government potentially be doing to try and mitigate the problems that will clearly be caused at such an important time for people to get around the country?
Well, I don't agree with your commentator there that said that this was depressing. I found it quite cheerful making. These guys are trying to kill us. 44,000 organised members of the, probably the Labour Party, are trying to make our lives literally dreadful. And it hasn't worked. Look at the stats. The stats show that in the major cities in the country today, traffic is up about 3%. People are not going to work. They're working from home. They're doing what I'm doing right now. I've got a business here. I'm getting on with it. And I actually pay their wages. I normally commute. I'm not commuting right now. Why? And this is going to go on for a very, very long time. Working from home has killed the power of this socialist mob from destroying our lives. Right? So as far as I'm concerned, they can carry on the strike forever. And the same issue actually applies to I get on great. We have a great local postman. I get on great with him. But actually, the days of delivering letters must surely be over. And these 155,000 people who are going on strike for 4 days are just going to cost themselves 4 days' money. I think the truth about the matter is that revenues are down 25% because people aren't going to work in the same way anymore. They're not coming back. And in fact, this strike has made it impossible. Take Saturday, for instance. This Saturday, great Premier League, great football day. Right? Normally, you'd be travelling by train. I certainly would. To see my local club. Instead of that, I get on a parking app I found, and I'm going to now drive, and I'm going to park my car actually not too far from the Fulham Brentford game. So the world is completely changing. The jobs that the 44,000 have at the moment are not the jobs that are going to exist in 5 or 7 years' time. So we might as well have the punch up now. There can't be any assurance from the management that the future is either with guards or with ticket offices. Everything is changing. Everything is changing. And one of the things that is changing is that unbelievably, and I wouldn't have believed this 5 years ago, less people are travelling by train. But I didn't know about COVID, and I didn't realise that tech would eventually change in a dramatic way the way that we work. We're living through an industrial revolution, and these guys, if they want secure jobs, have got to leave the railway business because those secure jobs don't exist anymore. 25% of the revenues of the company have gone. And were this, for instance, a big bakery company where 25% of our revenues disappeared because we didn't want so much sugar in our diet, nobody would think anything more about those 25% workers moving to jobs where they were wanted. It's just that if you've got socialists running a trade union, it's very much in their interest to try and take their pain and put that pain to you. I am sick and tired of funding their pay rises.
I suppose it's a compelling argument, and of course technology is making these strikes less severe, less biting.
The GBNews couldn't have even started without the new technology, without this quick link that we have between us, without Zoom, without, whatever.
Certainly, and that is enabling a lot. But listening to the words of Mick Lynch, stopping short of demanding a general strike, using the words coordinated strike action. If many different sectors all decide to go together, that still could really bite. What should the response to something like that be? Surely we can't rely solely on technological advancement.
OK, it's a very good point. So if what he's saying is that we're going to get the nurses in and the they're the only people that I actually give a damn about, right? So if the nurses and the doctors go on strike and I'm ill, or my family are ill, or your family are ill, or even with the news I've seen today that your chief executive is not too well, right? If that happens, then that is a serious day's work and to be solved. The rest of it, they can go and whistle Dixie out their rear ends. I couldn't care less. The days of Wapping, the days of the miners' strike, the days of this, that and the other have all come to an end. I'm afraid the power of the strike is at an end.
I wonder if that is more the case in some industries than other. In a city like London, where you have TfL controlling just about how people get around so much of the time, very different in very different parts of the country, very different in terms of the postal service or anything else, but particularly focusing in on TfL. That's a monopolistic provider. That is an issue. Should there be greater limits on what members of what employees of TfL are allowed to do, working as they are for an essential service?
Yeah, well, that you know, the other end of my argument is what's going on in the underground, the tube in London, which is a vital movement of labour and tourism and all kinds of other things across London. If you combine it with the buses, as they're doing tomorrow, in order to give us, you know, the worst possible outcome, then that is absolutely terrible. And I haven't got a solution to that. But the idea that every time a trade union leader or somebody says, "Isn't it painful about the inflation?" does the trade union movement honestly think that they're the only people that are suffering under the burden of inflation? They had the 400 billion out of furlough. Who knew that Ukraine was going to start? Who knew that COVID was going to start? And then when they finally get the bill, for sitting on their backside and doing nothing for 2 years, they say, "I'll tell you what, where's that 10%? There is pain going round for everybody. I don't care whether you're rich, poor, or in the middle. I'm in favour of the skint getting a handout, and everybody else has just got to decide whether they're going to go to Lorette de Mar for their holidays or Crete, and it looks like Lorette de Mar, and they might be blinking lucky to get to Torquay. It is just the reality of life. Life is like that. It's not like that. And by the way, when Liz Truss, when she becomes elected, will turn out to be the biggest single disaster for the Conservative Party since Edward Heath, right? And I tell you what, when you look at my head, you can tell, Tom, I can remember Edward Heath.
Wow, that is a bold prediction. I suppose she's got a lot to live up to. There's been a lot of rhetoric in this leadership contest. I suppose we'll have to have you back in a month or two into her premiership and see if that prediction has started to come true or not. But for now, Kelvin MacKenzie, if, of course, she wins, if we're believing the polls, that is, not to predict, not to prejudge the Democratic election taking place. But for now, Kelvin MacKenzie, really appreciate your time. Always a joy to have you on the programme. Now, the proportion of top A-level grades in England, Wales and Northern Ireland has fallen since 2021, but of course remains higher than before the pandemic in 2019. Around 36.4% of A-levels were marked at A-star and A this year. Last year, 44.8% of exams were graded A or above. It's the first time since 2019 that A-level grades have been based on public exams after 2 years of cancellations because of the COVID pandemic. Well, joining me now is Nick Hillman. He's the director of the Higher Education Policy Institute. And thanks for your time. I suppose the big question is so many people are reading in so much to these different results. Many newspaper headlines are how much these results are lower than last year. But surely the real news is there's been significant grade inflation even now compared to pre-pandemic time.
Hi, afternoon, Tom. I think the first bit of news is lots of people have done very well and they deserve congratulations. You know, they're ending their school and college career with, in many instances, a very good set of results. But look, your main point is correct. It really matters which baseline comparator year you choose. So if you compare this year's data to last year's data, then the students have done less well. If you compare it to the pre-pandemic period, 2019, then they've still done a whole lot better. Next year, we're expecting more grade deflation. So by this time next year, the world may be looking more like it did pre-COVID. But you're right, there's still grade inflation in the system.
And speaking of comparing this year to the teacher assessed year, the last teacher assessed year during COVID, the Financial Times has produced a graph comparing that pandemic year to now, showing that deflation has happened significantly more amongst A-star grades in students from private schools compared to other schools. We can see a graph on our screen now produced by the Financial Times. In your mind, what does this say about the effect of teacher assessment and how it distorted things throughout the pandemic?
It is a very, very striking chart. I completely agree with you. It shows that the system we've had in place for the past couple of years, with, as you say, those teachers' assessments doing all the heavy lifting, well, it shows the independent schools, the private schools, use that system to their advantage to a greater degree than other schools and got away with it. And this year, they're therefore having to take a bigger piece of the pain. It's still the case, by the way, even this year, even after the effect of that chart, that independent school kids have done better than state school kids. So even after that reduction, overall, independent schools are outperforming state schools. But year on year, they've fallen back more.
And yet it's interesting because we were comparing that to last year, comparing how private school children have done this year compared to the pre-pandemic time, compared to 2019. There's some suggestion now that actually compared to the pre-pandemic time, it's state schools that might have inflated more, judging by which year you do the comparison on. I suppose the question is, should these have ever been left to teacher assessment? Was teacher assessment ever a legitimate system, or does it open up too many children to the damaging grade inflation, the inability to differentiate between children, and frankly, unfairness?
Well, there came a point where teacher assessments were inevitable. The government, Gavin Williamson at the time, did not want to go to teacher assessments, and they resisted it until the last possible moment. But you'll remember that mutant algorithm that was imposed on people's A-level results 2 years ago that just produced incredibly unfair results. So the government had no choice but to move to the algorithm. They could have done something different if we were to go back 2.5 years. They could have had socially distanced exams of some sort. They did it in 1 or 2 countries. But there came a point where the teacher-assessed grades were inevitable.
When I remember doing my exams, our desks were pretty socially distanced in the first place. I would have thought that naturally doing an exam would be a pretty COVID-secure activity. Young people don't tend to be so at risk, don't tend to transmit so much, and being distanced as they are in exams, well, to me it didn't seem beyond the wit of man. But hopefully we never have to have that time again.
Well, I don't think we'll go back there. I mean, you were chatting to Kelvin McKenzie just before about Liz Truss. She has said if she were Prime Minister, then we would not go back to the sort of school closures, exam cancellations that we had in 2020 and 2021. So I think if we were ever, God forbid, to return to anything like the pandemic times, I think we would all want to protect schools to a much greater degree than perhaps they were protected in those couple of years.
Well, Nick Hillman, really appreciate your comments on this issue. No doubt this will be filtering through generations or indeed school years to come. Nick Hillman there from the Director of the Higher Education Policy Institute. Well, we're going to take a short break now. Coming up, we'll be discussing the worrying crisis in the Channel with GB News Home Affairs and Security expert Mark White. Don't go anywhere.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Join me, Darren Grimes, for Real Britain every Saturday and Sunday from 2 p.m. A news hour that comes with a trigger warning. Scorching hot opinion with prominent guests saying the unsayable, and a little bit of weekend fun thrown in. Unlike other broadcasters, I won't be forgetting what the B in our name stands for. So howie in for Real Britain Saturday and Sunday from 2 p.m.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
Welcome back. Now, earlier this week, the number of migrants arriving in the UK topped 20,000. And GB News has witnessed the cat and mouse tactics between the French police and those migrants. Authorities there face an almost impossible task of mounting effective patrols over the many miles of French coastline. Over days of filming, our team saw police using beach buggies to intercept groups of migrants before dispersing them with tear gas. But the criminal gangs are simply regrouping and making a dash for the sea again the second the police move off to chase those other groups of migrants further down the beach. Our Home and Security editor Mark White has this exclusive report.
Pushing off from the northwest coast of France, the latest group of Channel migrants attempting to cross into UK waters. Our drone footage perfectly illustrates how every inch of space on this small boat is taken up with its human cargo. We counted 50 people clambering on board this inflatable, some struggling to get to the boat as it picks up speed.
Look, he's running back.
We're at Gravelines, between Calais and Dunkirk, one of the people smugglers' favoured locations for attempting the crossing. Over days of filming, we witnessed the cat and mouse tactics of the police and migrants. From what we saw, French authorities are trying to stop the crossings, using beach buggies to try to intercept groups as they emerge from the dunes, firing tear gas to disperse the migrants. But in truth, despite some successes, there are far too many miles of coastline here for police to mount a fully effective presence. And although these groups are often chased back into the dunes, the people smugglers simply marshal them again, and when the police move down the beach to chase their next group, they make a dash for the sea. The local lifeguards have become used to multiple daily small boat launches. They're not officially allowed to intervene, but have helped when the boats get into difficulties.
It's sad, you know. We see children, we see the man with his wife, and it's dangerous. So.
The evidence of these migrants is everywhere around here. Discarded clothing littering the shoreline and the dunes along this tourist beach. The local tour guide says it's not just a UK and French issue, that the European Union has to do more.
I went to swimming and I saw a boat, a long boat with I don't know how many people in there, and we were a little bit shocked. I was scared for them because they were too much on the boat.
As concerning as the small boat crisis undoubtedly is for those in the UK, particularly in Kent, for people living here along the northwest coast of France, the impact is huge. In this supermarket car park in Dunkirk, we found this group of Eritreans just sitting around drinking Jack Daniels and smoking cannabis in broad daylight, waiting here until their next attempt to get to the UK.
Do you know anyone in the UK?
In UK? In UK? UK? I have UK for me. I have UK.
You know people?
I have UK for me.
The people smuggling industry is big business for the criminal gangs, who can net millions of pounds a day. They've become expert at reading the prevailing tide and weather conditions. These life jackets are hardly even hidden among the dunes, waiting for the next group to grab them as they attempt to cross. And we discovered personal papers and other documents discarded by the migrants on the instructions of the people smugglers to make identifying them more difficult for UK authorities. Among the papers, application forms for asylum in countries including Belgium. Further down the beach, more evidence of the French police tactic of slashing and puncturing these inflatables if they can get to them in time. But although some of those initial attempts are frustrated, the vast majority of small boats and their human cargo make it across the English Channel. More than 20,500 so far this year, to add to the tens of thousands who've already entered the UK asylum system. Mark White, GB News.
And thanks to Mark for that report. Coming up next on The Briefing, we'll be speaking to pollster Joe Twyman on the race for number 10 as it slowly comes to a close. But first, it's the latest headlines.
It's 3:34. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. The number of top A-level grades awarded to students in England, Wales and Northern Ireland has fallen since last year. They do, however, remain higher than pre-pandemic levels, the last time students physically sat exams. Meanwhile, UCAS says the number of students accepted at universities and colleges has also dropped, but it's still the second highest rate on record. The Queen's granddaughter, Lady Louise Windsor, is among those who've received their results, and Buckingham Palace says she'll attend St Andrews University. The 18-year-old daughter of the Earl and Countess of Wessex will start her course in English in September. She'll follow in the footsteps of the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge, who both went to the university in Fife, where they first met. The Secretary-General of the RMT union says there'll be waves of public sector workers joining in with strike action amid rising inflation and falling wages. Rail, tube and bus passengers face further travel disruption amid 3 days of industrial action. 80% of train services are affected today as more than 40,000 workers walked out in a dispute over pay and conditions. A 44-year-old man has been arrested in connection with the stabbing of Thomas O'Halloran in West London. The 87-year-old grandfather was attacked whilst riding his mobility scooter in Greenford on Tuesday. Police say the arrest was made as a result of CCTV images released yesterday. And scientists have found evidence of an asteroid crater beneath the North Atlantic Ocean, believed to be 66 million years old. It's thought to have crashed down around the same time as the asteroid that wiped out dinosaurs. Researchers think the crater, found off the coast of Guinea in West Africa, was caused by a 400-metre wide asteroid. TV online and DAB Plus radio, this is GB News.
Direct Bullion sponsors the finance report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy $1.199 and 1.186 euros. The price of gold currently stands at £1,471.40 per ounce.
Direct Bullion sponsors the finance report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. Now, Liz Truss retains a commanding lead over Rishi Sunak as the Tory leadership contest enters its final stages, a poll of Conservative Party members has found. YouGov has found that the Foreign Secretary has a 32-point lead over the former Chancellor, with 66% of members backing her to 34% backing Sunak. Excluding those who don't know how they would vote, of course. Well, joining me now is the pollster Joe Twyman to make sense of these numbers. And Joe, how many people have already voted in this contest? Is this contest already over?
Well, in answer to your first question, we don't know. We don't know how many Conservative Party members there are, let alone how many have voted. And I'm not even sure the Conservative Party knows how many Conservative members there are, but they will know how many have voted, but they're not releasing that information. The poll shows that 57% of the people who have taken part in the survey have already voted. And among those, the support for Liz Truss rises from 66% among the entire sample to 68% among those that have voted already. That means that Liz Truss has approximately about 2/3 of the votes that she needs already, based on this polling, to get over the line. She also leads among those people who have yet to vote. And so if this polling is to be believed, and there is all the historical evidence to suggest that it should be believed, it shows that Liz Truss is certainly in a very strong position. Rishi Sunak has it all to do. And among those people who have not yet voted, they need to swing overwhelmingly towards Rishi Sunak if he is to be victorious in September.
I remember all of the commentary at the start of this race when it became known it was going to be Liz Truss versus Rishi Sunak, saying this is going to be the closest Conservative leadership campaign ever, that there's no chance there'll be either of these candidates having the sort of unassailable lead that Boris Johnson enjoyed, the sort of 2/3 to 1/3 victory that we saw in that race. But it is seeming like it's moving in that direction. I wonder if the journalistic class in this country should have been looking at the data more closely, and specifically at the Conservative Home membership surveys. Now, of course, Conservative Home aren't a member of the British Polling Council. They're not weighted polls, but they are eerily accurate very often, these surveys, that as every month they'd been surveying their readership, the Tory membership, over who they thought was doing well and doing poorly in the cabinet, Liz Truss was always near the top over those last few months before the leadership election, and Rishi Sunak always near the bottom.
Well, there's a number of things to look at there. Firstly, it could still be the closest Conservative leadership election in history, because Conservative leadership elections do not tend to be very close at all. And so if Liz Truss's victory falls below sort of 60%, as it perhaps could do, then it would still be the closest in history without being particularly close. But you're right, there were some comments that it could be close, and I think that was a lot to do with the potential of Rishi Sunak to prove popular among Conservative members. Now, you talked about the Conservative Home data, which is not really a survey as much as it is a census of people who go onto the Conservative Home website, and that has some validity. But what that data also showed was that for a long time, Rishi Sunak was the most popular of the people to replace Boris Johnson. Now, of course, that means going back to the pandemic, and it was since the pandemic, since the high point of his popularity, that we did see him fall back, and he has taken a number of hits. But he certainly had the potential to return to those heady heights, even if it was always going to be a tough task ahead of him. But what we've seen consistently throughout the campaign, when it's just been the two of them, is that Rishi Sunak has failed to really make a significant impact on the polling. The polling has been pretty consistent now throughout the campaign. Now, it could still change. We could still have some revelations, but with the indications that so many people within the Conservative Party membership have voted already, it really would have to be a quite enormous turnaround now for Liz Truss to not be crowned the next Prime Minister. But will that be enough to unite the Conservative Party? Well, that remains to be seen. And crucially, how will that appeal to the general public? How will the British voters view that? Because Rishi Sunak has consistently, despite his fallbacks in recent months, he has proved the more popular of the two among the general public and continues to do so. So it is perhaps the case that we could see a situation of a repeat in 2001, where the most popular candidate among the general public then was Ken Clarke, but it was Ian Duncan Smith who won out among the Conservative Party members. And look how he did.
Now, whilst the Rishi Sunak campaign has been saying that fairly consistently, the Liz Truss campaign has been able to point to some data in the last week or two that shows, given a head-to-head Liz Truss versus Sir Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak versus Sir Keir Starmer, she's marginally ahead on some of those polls compared to where Rishi Sunak is marginally behind. What can we read into that?
Pretty much nothing. Firstly, the differences are relatively small, and so the margin of error means that essentially they're neck and neck. But more importantly than that, human beings, particularly the British electorate, are extraordinarily bad at explaining their own behaviour, particularly in hypothetical situations such as this. And so what we know is that essentially they're judged pretty much the same by the general public, and that's no real indication of where we will be in 6 months, 3 months, or indeed 2 years' time when there's a new general election. The key issue facing the general public at the moment is the cost of living crisis. In polls, consistently, that comes top as the most important issue facing not just the country, but facing individuals and their families. And neither Rishi Sunak nor Liz Truss have really come up with any kind of solution that has resonated with the general public so far. That will be a crucial issue over the next months and years in determining the performance of the Prime Minister, whoever that may be, compared to Keir Starmer. And as we stand at the moment, it's impossible to tell where either of the two candidates will really be on that. And so as a consequence, it's likely that those results will change significantly once one of them, we assume Liz Truss, but it could be either, once one of them gets into Downing Street.
A really, really big test of either of these potential prime ministers in their first week or so in office. Well, I suppose it's not long now to wait and see. For now, Joe Twyman, thank you very much for talking through those really important issues there. Now, next today, throughout all of July, Europe's 6 largest countries offered Ukraine no new bilateral military commitments. Those countries are France, Germany, Spain, Italy, Poland, and Britain. This is the first month that this has happened since Russia invaded in February. The revelation is a sign that despite historic shifts in European defence policy, which have seen once reluctant countries like France and Germany ship arms to Ukraine, military aid to Ukraine may be waning just as Kiev launches a crucial counter-offensive. But what does all of this mean? Joining me now is British Army Colonel Hamish de Bretton-Gordon. And Hamish, I suppose, does no new commitments mean no new equipment being sent? Or does this mean no further commitments on top of what we had already promised, which may well be being sent as we speak, if you see what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely, Tom. I think the report is a little bit ambiguous, and certainly as far as the UK is concerned, pretty disingenuous. We, apart second only to the Americans, have given the most equipment, training and intelligence. And there are some countries in Europe that are not pulling their weight in this respect. You know, the French and the Germans, I think generally we feel could certainly do more. But if I open the windows behind me, I'm just on the edge of Salisbury Plain, you'd hear the firing of the training of over 2,000 Ukrainian soldiers, which we've been doing throughout July and will do throughout August to train 10,000 frontline troops. So I think it's very good, and I'm delighted that you're covering this point, because we really need to keep the Ukraine war absolutely on the front pages, in the focus of people's attention. You know, not least today, reports of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power station potentially being prepared by the Russians to blow up in some false flag sort of operation, which would have an impact not just in Ukraine, but all over Europe and Russia as well.
Really significant stuff there, and potentially desperation from the Russians, because things have been going fairly badly for them over the last couple of weeks. Are we potentially seeing now a turning point in this war? The Ukrainians now have this longer range weaponry. They're potentially going to be taking back Kherson, pushing the Russians to the other side of the Dnieper River down there, getting potentially the ability to move this conflict on from the relative stalemate that we've seen in recent months.
Yes, Tom, I think you're right. And we're all hopeful that the tide is turning and Ukraine is getting on the front foot and is starting to push some of those Russian forces back. Conventionally, the Russians are performing very badly. We've seen the amount of tanks that they've lost and troops, and they're now losing some sort of ground, which is why it is of increasing concern that the Russians may turn to unconventional, or what we call asymmetric warfare, that has fared them well in Syria. And we know that Putin, you know, in his own mind, probably can't afford to fail in Ukraine because he will be over. So as we hear stories about nuclear power stations and others, and we get threats from, you know, the Russian Ministry of Defense and some of its supporters about the nuclear issue, we need to be absolutely on the balls of our feet. And as you said earlier, we need to keep supporting the Ukraine government and military in all that we can, because otherwise, you know, some of the other issues that we're focusing, you know, our minds so desperately on, like the Conservative leadership election, quite frankly, you know, will be horrifyingly unimportant if Ukraine doesn't prevail and we get involved in some dreadful sort of nuclear accident or attack.
And I suppose if this war drags on longer, if the Russians regain a front foot, it's the cost of living crisis that stretches on longer. It's the oil prices and gas prices that remain high. It's the food prices, frankly, that continue to rise. I wonder, what should Britain now be doing to ensure that Ukraine fatigue doesn't set in, to ensure that the Ukrainians can continue to push the Russians back?
Well, I would hope that the two key political parties make sure that people in this country are aware the reason that their fuel is at £1.80 a litre or whatever is because of the Ukraine crisis, pushing up the price of fuel because of its lack of supply. The reason that food prices are going through the roof is because there's 40 million tonnes of grain stuck in Ukraine. Now, if we want to get over the inflation drama at the moment, we need to make sure that Ukraine prevails, because before the Ukraine war, the price of fuel was 50p or 40p less than it is today. Now, if we return to those figures, just imagine what would happen to inflation. So we need to keep up the pressure here and not use other excuses for our inflation and interest rate rises. You know, this is a generational fight that we're involved in indirectly at the moment. We must make Ukraine prevail, otherwise we might be directly involved in it.
Really, really harrowing stuff there. Well, Hamish de Bretton-Gordon, always appreciate your time on The Briefing. Thank you for joining us and talking those issues through. Now, finally today, a key Nicola Sturgeon advisor who was labelled the poster child of Scottish nationalism was sensationally axed from their Economic Advisory Board after he struggled to, quote, find the positive case for partitioning the United Kingdom. Skexit, as some know it. An email released from a Freedom of Information Act showed that Professor Mark Blythe, he stated, "I've been made the poster child for independence, and even I'm stumped. I've been trying to write something positive on the subject of the economic case, but keep struggling to find the positive case that I had hoped for." That in a Freedom of Information request revealed email. Well, let's cross to Glasgow now, where I'm joined by Daily Express journalist Dan McCroskey. And this is the most extraordinary admission, one of the poster boys for the economic case for Scotland breaking away from the United Kingdom. And he's admitted in this private correspondence that there's no case.
It's one of many, Tom, that's admitted there's no case. I think we've all known that for an awfully long time now, those of us on the unionist side, but it's quite incredible that it's taken somebody who has not just been an advisor to the Scottish Government for some time, but somebody who has been touted by MSPs, by independence activists, for his insight into Scotland's future as an independent country, and for him to come out and say that there is no case, or that he can't find a case that's positive enough, I think it's quite incredible. He's not the only person that's done it, of course. I've got to also give some credit to Sam Taylor on Twitter, who runs These Islands, who went through a lot of this FOI correspondence and detailed the various issues that Mark Blythe had with the Scottish Government. But it is quite incredible that somebody who was part of the original 20-strong team of advisors to the First Minister and to the Scottish Government has now come out and said that there is absolutely nothing that he can find that's positive. I think that's a very glaring omission indeed.
It's extraordinary to listen to some of the proponents of breaking up the United Kingdom who point to the amount of international trade that Scotland does with, for example, the European Union, saying that ought to be protected, ignoring the much larger proportion of internal UK trade, which would then become foreign to them. I suppose some of these numbers have been fiddled, and potentially that's what this advisor has been looking at in the cold light of day. Ultimately, it's more than 2/3 of Scotland's trade, when you take into account internal trade as well, that relies upon the United Kingdom, and far less than 15% that relies upon the European Union. I wonder if the fact of Brexit, the fact of, for example, the problems of the Northern Irish border, the fact that potentially Skexit might mean a physical hard border between England and Scotland, might that now be weighing upon the minds of the Scottish people?
Well, I think it undoubtedly will be. And I mean, of course, Mark Blythe did say, I mean, this is one of the things he said about a year ago, that Skegsit would be 10 times worse than Brexit. And that's the kind of the negatives of Brexit, not the positives of Brexit, of course, I should probably add. I mean, he's not been always in favour of independence. He's been critical in the past, and he said a variety of things, that it would take 20 years for Scottish independence to work out, and that there would be costs of going down that route. And as you say, one of the costs of going down that route would invariably be a hard border between Scotland and England, and that was, of course, raised back in 2014. And I think, if I'm being frank, it was maybe a little bit for the birds back then. But with Brexit now, because Scotland would want to rejoin the European Union as a full member, wouldn't receive the benefits that we did have prior to Brexit, the negotiations that were made by Thatcher, etc. We would join as a full member. That would mean Schengen. That would mean probably a hard border as well, because England would remain outside the EU, Scotland would be part of it. And unlike Ireland, the Isle of Ireland, and which includes Northern Ireland, which has this convoluted protocol to prevent violence, Scotland and England wouldn't really have that problem. There wouldn't be any real barrier to erecting a hard border and having customs checks, etc., if Scotland did become independent and, of course, critically try to rejoin the European Union as a full member. This poses serious issues, which I think people across Scotland are thinking about. It's probably why, despite everything that's happened recently in Westminster, the polls haven't really shifted at all on this issue.
Really, really important to raise that, because so often we talk as if it's the settled will of the Scottish people to break up the United Kingdom, when the polls show precisely the opposite. Well, Dan McCroskey, thanks for joining us here on The Briefing. That's it for the interview and indeed the programme today. The show's back every weekday from 9:30 a.m. Tomorrow, I'll be live from Manchester at midday ahead of our special hustings with Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss. Up next, it's brazier, but I'll leave you with the weather for now.
Hi there, Aidan McGivern here with the latest forecast. Cloudy for many of us today, and it is fairly damp at the moment for northern and western parts of the country. The rain sinks southeast overnight and turns to showers as it crosses the country. But there is currently a series of weather fronts straddling the UK, moving in, tied into an area of low pressure that is anchored to the northwest of the UK. And those weather fronts bringing a lot of cloud and some steady and at times heavy rain for parts of Wales and northwest England during the early part of the evening. That rain then pushes into the southwest of England, the Midlands, and later turns up into the southeast. Clearing skies behind the rain, but for parts of central and western Scotland, Northern Ireland, further showers. 9 to 12 Celsius in the north, a fresh night here. Still quite warm in the southeast, 17 Celsius, and a lot of cloud to start the day on Friday. In fact, some of this showery rain could pep up and give a thunderstorm perhaps for a time during Friday morning. It does clear though, and then by lunchtime for much of the southern half of the UK it's sunny spells, light winds as well, and feeling pleasant in that sunshine with temperatures up to 24 to 26 Celsius. A cooler feel, I think, for Scotland, Northern Ireland and Northern England. Sunny spells and showers, a fresh breeze and temperatures in the high teens. But many of these showers die away through the evening. Clear spells then for many for the first part of the night, but it won't take long before, well, the next area of low pressure and some weather fronts reach the far northwest. So for Western Scotland, Northern Ireland, the winds pick up overnight. Coastal gales for Western Scotland, some heavy rain turning up. Elsewhere, clear spells and with lighter winds, temperatures in some rural spots across central England, eastern Scotland dipping into the single figures. So we start off Saturday with the breezy and wet conditions for Scotland and Northern Ireland, pushing into northern England and turning to showers, staying dry for the most part further south,